Hi, everybody. I'm going to make this brief so that we can benefit more from Professor Gilbert's talk. But I just wanted to give you some of his background. He is a very well-respected scholar of international politics and political theory. He has a number of books that he's published both in dealing with political theory and international politics. His first book was called Marx's Politics, published with Rutgers University Press. His second book was entitled Democratic Individuality, and his third book, published in 1999, is called Must Global Politics Constrain Democracy? And he's currently working on about to release a new book entitled Emancipation and Independence, which deals specifically with very interesting and not particularly well-known archival data that shows that a significantly higher number of Black Americans participated in the war for independence here in the United States, both on the side of the the revolutionaries as well as on the side of the British. He also shows that this information has been significantly downplayed throughout history. So basically showing that African Americans have had, as we all know, had a significant and long history of involvement in the United States. But this is very controversial and interesting research, and it should be coming out with the University of Chicago Press, I believe, sometime in 2010. And his resume is impressive and wonderful, and there's all sorts of reasons to bring him here based on his resume. But I just want to say a few other things from a personal perspective. I've known Professor Gilbert since 2001. I met him just before I began my own doctoral work at the University of Denver, where he is a professor in the Joseph Corbell School of International Studies. I met him in part because he came very highly recommended by one of my advisors, Manfred Steger, who told me after reading his second book, Democratic Individuality, that, and I quote, Professor Gilbert is a genius. And that was part of the reason why I went initially to the University of Denver to study with him. On a more interesting note, I met him in part because I had heard about his own political activities in the anti-war movement, in the civil rights movement in the 60s and 70s, as well as a number of other radical organizing things that he had been doing while he was a student and a graduate student at Harvard University. I had heard that he had been thrown out of Harvard for these activities because he was such a dissident and radical, right? He had been a member of the Students for Democratic Society and had been thrown out because of these organizing activities. And I thought, oh, this is a great story. I also heard that he had been reinstated by a majority vote of the faculty because he was such an amazing student. So he had that side of the story that I thought was very interesting and very intriguing. I asked him to speak at an anti-war rally right after September 11th at the University of Denver, and he very obligingly came and spoke, and I introduced him with this story about being thrown out of Harvard, and he said to me, like, that's the first time I've ever been introduced at a public meeting as somebody who'd been thrown out of school. But anyway, really what I want to say is that Alan is a scholar. He is a radical Democrat. He is an activist for peace. He's very much an anti-racist. He is a mentor. He is a teacher, and he's also a very good friend. So I just want to say thank you, Professor Gilbert, for coming and speaking here today. And if you could just, everybody, give him a quick round of applause and welcome him.
Thank you for the very kind introduction. Unfortunately, we live in the Obama era, in which I'm sure there will be lots of reasons to demonstrate, but it's hard to believe that one would find it necessary to be thrown out of an educational institution being interested in education and decency in the Obama era. Whereas in the Bush-Cheney era, one might find it easy to get into trouble, except that they seem to go for those in higher places for the most part. Today is not a particularly happy day for America. the Second Circuit Court in Washington ruled by a vote of 7-4 that Meher Arar, a Syrian engineer who lives in Canada, who made the mistake of being flown into LaGuardia and was kidnapped by the government and the Injustice Department, and I underline injustice under Bush, had him, they said, you know, we send this guy to Syria, he's going to be tortured. So, two senior officials in the Justice Department then urged that he be sent to Syria, where he was tortured for a year. 10 months, actually. He's put in a coffin-sized cell. And he was returned to Canada because the Syrians said, you know, this guy has nothing to do with anything. He's just some engineer we picked up and tortured. So in Canada, they've had a whole investigation, and they have paid him some millions of Canadian dollars to pay for his legal expenses and some damages. There is no reparation of the damages. He has been. They torture you like they tortured him. It makes you very shaky as a human being. He is a very tough man. But the Second Circuit Court of Appeals ruled that really he has no right to have his lawsuit in the United States of America, because you know he can't name the people who did this to him. And I guess these judges are insufficient in their powers to go and command that the U.S. government, although, by the way, the names of these two senior lawyers and the guy who then resigned, whose name is Thompson, who ordered that he be sent to Syria, seem to be known. So there was one judge, Guido Calabresi, who is very well known and who was the dean of the Yale Law School. And he was a dissenter in this, and he said, this decision will be remembered in American history like the Dred Scott decision. People know the Dred Scott decision. Dred Scott decision returned a fugitive slave who had escaped the horrors of bondage back into slavery. If you want to know why the Supreme Court, though it is supposed to be dedicated to defending basic rights and the Bill of Rights, is, for most of American history, a fairly disgusting institution. I exempt the period of Brown versus Board of Education, but the current leadership of the Supreme Court, you know, they're perfectly happy, the reactionary for the non-conservatives, to throw people away. Perfectly happy that the government do anything to people